Hey, it's Mike over at fishyourassoff.com, and today what we're talking about is spotted sea trout fishing tips and techniques. Basically how to catch more spotted sea trout. They're one of those fish that if there's a grass flat, there's probably some sea trout on them. They're pretty good to eat. Sometimes they got a lot of worms in them, but at least lately, it seems like. But they're certainly a fun fish to catch. They're one of the probably most sought after inshore saltwater species there is. And if you like to catch them, we're going to talk all about them. I'm going to tell you what I know. So here we go. Trout fishing tips. Okay, so I mainly fish on the flats, so that's what we're going to talk about here today, is flats fishing for the most part. You can find them other places, but they're mainly in the grass flats, creek mouths, oyster bars, all these things that are a lot of time related to shallow water. So at low tide, you can find them in the potholes. A lot of times, unless it gets too shallow. When it gets too shallow, you'll find them in the channels and the deep cuts that are very near those potholes. And I'm talking once it gets down to 18 inches or so. Usually, I don't find too many of them in there. Sometimes, but typically they want to have a little bit deeper water. High tide, they're all through the grass. The big ones, however, almost always, regardless of it, want to be usually pretty close to a nice big drop off. They didn't get so big from being stupid. So they want to be close to somewhere they can hide. So they want to have a deep spot, and they also want a super shallow spot nearby in case the sharks or porpoise or something is after them. So that's where you find the big ones. In the wintertime, you fish deep until the sun warms up the flats. And it's as simple as that. So when the water's super cold, fish deep because the water's probably a little warmer down there for them. Once the sun's out and warms up the mud flats or the dark grass flats, that's when you'll find your trout there. Basically the opposite with trout in the summertime. In the summertime, you want to fish those flats early because it gets too hot for them and then they go deep. And usually don't bite when they go down deep either for whatever reason. But in the summertime, to me anyways, it seems like you got maybe till 11 o'clock to really catch your trout on the grass flats, and then they're out of there. Another great place to find them is any point that's adjacent to deeper water, because like I told you before, the big trout usually want to be able to get away from something if it's after them. It seems like they're always real close. Within, 10, 15 yards or so. They like to be pretty close to a deeper spot. Here's a great example. Say you had a channel here, and a perfect example would be there'd be another channel here. They're going to be staged up all along these points, waiting to ambush their prey items when they come by. So that's why I say big trout like to be close to a deep spot. When there's a lot of bait in the water, usually that first 2 hours of the incoming tide seems to be best because they'll actually get full. It sounds funny, but they have very small stomachs when you think about it. So you probably had a situation where you can see them. You throw the perfect live shrimp right in front of their nose and they ignore it like, it's a piece of spinach or something. It's because they're probably already full because there's so much bait in the water. When there's not a lot of bait, really doesn't matter. You fish all the time, doesn't matter. Incoming, outgoing tide, whatever. Now, when you're fishing with artificials, or even not artificials, when you're popping cork, a popping cork with a live shrimp, excellent bait. But a popping cork with anything underneath it, a fake shrimp, any sort of paddle tail, anything just bouncing around when you're using a popping cork, work great for trout. Probably my second best, catching the most trout, is any sort of paddle tail swim baits, any of them. I like a white or pearl or a glow one, but in a red head, but any sort of swim baits like that. Top water, any sort of top water that looks like a mullet. Those top water, big top water, quite often will get you a big trout first thing in the morning. I like a mirror lure or a zero spook or something like that. And the old standby gold spoons. Gold spoons catch everything. Redfish, they catch everything. Gold spoons are great. weedless gold spoon will do you just right. A little harder to hook the trout with the weedless ones, but you can still give it a go. They're usually in schools when you find these smaller ones, the just keeper size, like 15, 16, 17 inches. If you catch one, you probably catch a bunch more, where it seems like a lot of the big ones, those 24, 25 inches, are usually alone. Best time to catch trout is the first one. Best time to catch just about everything. First 2 and the last 2 hours of the day. It's just as simple as that. That's how predators like to do things. This one. When you find the depth where the fish are, you fish that until that depth changes and they move. So say you're catching all your trout in 4 feet of water. Well, tide comes in and where you're fishing is now 5 feet of water, 6 feet of water. You might have to move closer and find that depth again, because there. A lot of times I've found that trout are very depth specific. They're in 2 feet of water. You catch them in 2 feet of water. Keep fishing in 2 feet of water. Just keep finding that water level and keep going. Because a lot of times you'll be fishing 2, you'll move to 4, you get no more bites. Now, when it comes to fishing trout, mono is better than braid, and the reason is because braid, it doesn't give you any give, and it tears their mouth, and a lot of times your hooks come out. So they're very, very, very weak fish, I guess you'd say. They're very easily harmed. We're going to talk about that at a couple more down. They have a very high mortality rate. So you got to be careful when you're fishing with trout, or you're just going to kill them all. Big trout eat big baits. We already covered that. You throw a big Sarah Super Spook or something out that, you might get your biggest trout you ever caught first thing in the morning. And the high mortality rate. When you're catching all the same and you're not going to keep them anymore, say they're undersized, you're just into the 13 and 12 inches, don't even touch them. Just use a de-hooker, just a little de-hooker thing. Don't even touch them, because those little ones are very weak. They're going to die. Big ones are a little tougher, but they have an extremely high mortality rate when you're fishing with those trout. That's about it. We got a lot more stuff I could talk about, but I don't have any more room on my whiteboard. But if you want to find more of this information, go to our website. It's www.fishyourassoff.com. There's a how-to section, how to target redfish, snook, trout, whatever. Where to, what baits to use, what lures to use. That's all right there on our website. The whole site is simple tips to help fishermen catch more fish. So that's what you can do right there. But I think that's it for today. So until next time, we'll see you then. All right. Bye-bye.